Now that you got SQL Server Media downloaded, you should run that file and you'll have something like this pop up. You've got a few different options. You've got your basic setup, which will do the installs with features with the default configuration. You've got a custom setup, which is what we're going to use, and then you've got download media, so you can use those later. We're going to hit custom. If I were using a server, I would change this media location to something else, but I'm not, just because this is a regular computer. All right, let's go to install. This portion will take a few minutes. It's going to do the setup. It's going to do its checks. It's going to warn me on my firewall. All right, so here is the installation types. We can do a new install, or you can add features if you already have a few installed. I have a default SQL Server instance, which is the name of the server or computer that you're on, and a named one, which is the name of the SQL Server or the name of the server or computer you're on, and then it's got a slash with the name you provide afterwards. In this case, I put SQL 1. And then it's going to ask you about what edition of SQL Server 2022 you want to install. You've got a few different options over here. You got the evaluation. This is kind of free trial. Then you've got your developer, and then you've got Express. Use developer. There's a few options in the billing. You can go through Microsoft Azure. I've never used this one, but it is an interesting idea. And then you've got the option, if you happen to have a product key already purchased, you can come over here and then you can type in your product key. Then it would probably use whatever one you're using. I'm assuming standard or enterprise. And then, excuse me, and then you would type in, you click on whether you have software assurance or not. If you have software assurance, it allows you to do an upgrade to a newer SQL Server version rather than buying a new license in the future. Except, I hit that wrong. I'm going back over here. Developer. All right. We're not doing anything with Azure in this course, so we're just gonna unselect that. As I mentioned before, this course is primarily going to be focused on the engine. So we're going to click on the engine. There's a few other options over here, like SQL Server replication. That's got transactional replication, merge, snapshot built into it. That's pretty useful. It's got machine learning, full text, data quality services, polybase, and a few other ones over here that could be useful, but at this point, I don't want to install more on my machine than I need to. Yeah, first of all, it clutters up everything, and also it's using resources if it's not even really needed. We don't want to just install everything, throw the book at it, install everything, because it's just gonna eat up your RAM, your CPU, and it's probably gonna take longer to do patching. All right. So this is the portion where I said that I used a default instance. You can only have one default instance per server or computer. since it's your computer name, that makes sense why. You can't name two different instances the same name. So you've got a named instance. You can have a bunch of these on your machine. There are some licensing restrictions. I think you can say for like a standard, you could have up to like 4 different uh, SQL servers running on the same server or computer and use the same license. That might have changed right now, so don't take licensing advice from me at this point. But that was something that we had done in the past. We used multiple SQL servers, and then we would license that single server. Uh, so since I can't use a default and I can't use SQL 1, I'm going to go ahead and put in SQL 2. For the purposes of this course, I'll end up using SQL 1 and the default, but for the setup, the install, I'm going to show you guys what it's going to look like. I don't want to install too many different instances on this server or this computer. All right. So now you get to the server configuration where it's going to ask you about your service account. It's going to have some default Windows ones. Usually if you have Active Directory, I would probably have some generic accounts created with access. I believe that's a better security practice. And then you want to go over here and make this automatic. So whenever you start up, your SQL Server agent's going to start up as well. A lot of times you might have a SQL Server job that alerts you that your SQL Server's been rebooted, for instance, or maybe it's going to do a DBCC check integrity. There are a few different options, and you want to make sure that agent is up to take backups or whatever the purpose might be. But I'm not sure why it is even manual as default. And then you've got your SQL Server, you got your SQL Server agent, you got your SQL Server engine, and then you got your browser. Your browser is primarily used for named instances. It isn't really used whenever you're running a default instance. Then you've got your grant perform volume maintenance task. Uh, this is going to grant access for that to help with instant file initialization. That'll help grow the files. All right, so here we've got the database engine configuration. We've got one of the main things you need to look at is authentication mode. So we're gonna you see by default it's gonna be Windows authentication mode, and then it's got mixed mode, which allows SQL Server authentication as well. We're gonna go ahead with that, and then we're gonna give the SA password. Give it the SA password. And then you usually want to add at least one login. I'm going to add my current user. Then we'll go to data directories. If this was a server, I would break up different drives for different things. Say I would have one drive specifically for my installs of my data files. So if you change this to G, for instance, it's going to change it on all of them. I would change my base directory, my database directory where I keep all my database files. I would change that over to, say, a G drive or X drive or something that happened to be specifically used for those data files. And I'd create another directory, log directory uh, drive that happened to only hold transaction logs, and then maybe even have another drive set up just for these backups. And I jumped the gun. I'm gonna go back over to here, and we're gonna go look over at the tempdb. You're gonna get a file for every CPU you have, and that initial size is going to be 8 meg, and it's going to auto grow to 64 at 64 megs, and then you're going to have the same for your log. So in total, you're going to have 5 different files: 4 for your data files, and then 1 for your log on your tempdb. We'll just keep these settings default. If you know that you're going to have a larger server, you might want to go and add some extra space over here. Just get it ready to prevent some fragmentation. I'm going to go to the max stop, which it stands for max degree of parallelism. Whenever your queries happen to hit that cost threshold for parallelism, which by default I think is 5, you'll want to it will want to use multiple cores for that single query, which is awesome until that one query uses up all your different CPU and you can't run anything else. So a lot of the times I like to drop this down to something like 2 just by default, and then in the future, if I need to, I'll bring it back up. And then memory. SQL Server and most databases love memory. So one of the two of the settings that you get to play with this are going to be its minimum server memory and the maximum server memory. SQL Server's minimum server memory by default is 0. So whenever the operating system needs extra space, it's going to push back all the SQL Server memory down to 0. So we don't want that. We want to leave a little bit of data in there. And we want to give it a little bit extra for its maximum. So you'll see that there is the max memory. This is the max that it can go to, and then this is the minimum. Once it doesn't start off at 1,000 or at 1 gig, but once it hits 1 gig, it won't go below there until the server's restarted. We're going to go to accept these recommended memory configurations, and then I would just hit install. But since I've already got 2 other SQL Server instances installed already on here, I'm not going to do that, and we will pick up in the next one to install Management Studio.